your screen. We hope you enjoyed today's event. We will begin soon. Thank you for joining the National Benevolent Association for today's event. We will begin shortly. If you are joining us on Zoom, you will be able to view computer-generated closed captions by clicking the CC button at the bottom center of your screen. We hope you enjoyed today's event. We will begin soon. Thank you for joining the National Benevolent Association for today's event. We will begin shortly. If you are joining us on Zoom, you will be able to view computer-generated closed captions by clicking the CC button at the bottom center of your screen.
It is good for us to be together. Welcome again for another evening of spending time with us during our September month, where we gather around the topic Imagine. As we indulge this week on Imagine and Response, we are excited to have a great group of panelists who shared their content earlier, as well as an awesome keynote speaker who will be speaking to us later in the evening. MBA Social Entrepreneurship Program continues to support disciples who are imagining a better world in their own communities, responding to the cries of God's people, responding in such a way that they are working toward justice and liberation and meeting the immediate needs of those whose backs are against the wall. And we're grateful to be able to walk alongside and be able to resource and equip and encourage those tenacious individuals as they engage the world of social entrepreneurship. Our seminar is a month-long time where we're able to not only gather with social entrepreneurs or those who have an interest in social entrepreneurship, but we're also able to gather with a larger audience who have an interest in the work of at least thinking about social entrepreneurship, thinking about a world that works for everybody. We want to continue to cultivate this conversation of social entrepreneurship across life of our churches. We recognize this is the work of the church. This is sacred and holy work, doing the work of justice, responding to the needs of those whose backs are against the wall. So we again welcome you, and we're excited for you to be joining us this evening. So we'll define social entrepreneurship now, and social entrepreneurship in short is addressing a need, a social need, responding to a social need. So an entity that exists merely to respond to some type of social issue that's going on. So all of our entrepreneurs we use the phrasing, heard the cries of God's people, and they are responding. If something has touched their heart in which they recognize that something needs to be done. And as we talked about last week, what it means to be sent. These individuals feel a deep sense of call, a sending forth to go and respond to these issues by creating organizations, nonprofits that seek to address those needs. A few housekeeping rules. We have 3 presentations that were released earlier this week. So we hope that those who registered for SENT have had a chance to review them, and those who may say, hey, I didn't register yet, but I want to have access to these great panelists and their presentations, you can always register for Sent Still. The registration can be found on our website on nbacares.org under the events tab. It is not too late to register. So after our keynote speaker this evening, we'll be joined by our presenters as well as the keynote speaker for question and answer. So please, if you have any questions, jot those down during the time which you're hearing the keynote speaker, and we will look forward to engaging in a time of question and answer. You can submit those answers to the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the time together, and we'll lift up those questions that you raise. So again, this week, as we think about imagining response, we're happy to have such a great plethora of people who we would consider practitioners in some way of doing the work of responding to God's people in their own organizations or through people that they work for. So we look forward to just being able to move from imagine as a big picture, but to actually see tangible ways that we can respond, and even being able to see how congregations through our keynote speaker are responding to the social needs in their community. That being said, I don't want to take up too much more time. I want us to be able to hear more about the people that we'll be hearing from later during the question and answer time, as well as introduce our keynote speaker.
Dr. Mark Sampson, who provided the workshop Community Asset Assessments, is the co-founder and lead learner at Rooted Good, which equips leaders with resources and processes to do good work and strengthen capacity of nonprofits, congregations, and social enterprises. Mark is also a non-executive director of the Curiosity Society. Reverend Alexis Vaughan, who provided the workshop Building Coalitions for Sustainable Action, serves as a peer learner and wellness group convener for the National Benevolent Association. Her work involves nurturing engagement strategies with the NBA and its partners to transform root causes of social injustice, as well as furthering NBA's issue-based advocacy efforts. This is all part of her career in ministry and community organizing. We're also joined by Tyler Hoffman, who provided the workshop Utilizing Technology in Social Enterprises, and he helps businesses, nonprofits, and individuals to use technology to realize their full potential. He's based in Cleveland, Ohio, and serves as a digital solutions consultant to several organizations, including the Council for Health and Human Service Ministries of the United Church of Christ. He has more than a decade of experience working in IT across higher education, nonprofit, and for-profit organizations. And finally, we're also joined by Julie Ha Truong, who provided the workshop Developing Your Mission and Voice. She's founder of Leadership Savvy, and for 20 years, Julie has supported thousands of diverse leaders in achieving meaningful, lasting change. Skilled at leading cross-cultural, cross-sector, innovative, and award-winning initiatives, Julie is an expert facilitator and nonprofit strategist.
So one of the things about doing this work, you have to learn to appreciate jazz. So we have a script in place, and we're having some tech issues with our keynote speaker. So we have to learn how to improvise in the moment. So I want to ask our our presenters to share, because everybody was approached at some time this year about being a part of this Sent Seminar 2022. So I just want to get your response. When you heard the theme, Imagine, what came up for you? What made you say, yes, I want to be a part of this conversation around imagining? So if we could just share from our presenters, what made you say yes to wanting to imagine with us?
I can hop in. Good evening, everyone. When I first heard the theme of Imagine, I really understood that as like an invitation, NBA sort of welcoming us to imagine this sort of new era that we're sort of living into. At the time that the invitation was made, we were just beginning to sort of see the other side of the pandemic, and some things were just starting to sort of come back to life, so to speak. And so much of that time was, we had just been through this really traumatic experience together globally, and sort of realized what structures and institutions were not working for us and what was not helpful. So when I heard Imagine, and at the time, it just sort of felt like an invitation to maybe create something new, create something better, so that we could enter this new sort of phase of our joint existence together in a better way.
And I can just add that for me, technology and imagination go hand in hand. So I was so excited to receive this invitation to be here today. In addition to some of the organizations I work with, I'm so happy to work with NBA in a consulting capacity and being able to see the good work that you all do. And I think just to echo the point made that in this post-pandemic reality, we've grown a lot during this time. We've learned the role that technology can play in helping us reach our full potential. So for me, I'm looking forward to imagining what that next step looks like for organizations, for social enterprises. Now that we've grown and learned it during the pandemic, now how can we apply it in our efforts moving forward?
Yeah, I'll just add onto that. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, imagination is one of my favorite sort of words and concepts, and I think something there's also a deficit of largely. Interestingly, I think there's a high cultural value on innovation, but sometimes a deficit of imagination. And yet we need to get to new places, not just places more quickly. So I'm always intrigued by that word, and always a big fan of anything that NBA and Darnell Ashley put their hands to. So yes, delighted to be here.
Hi, everyone. I had to go off camera for a bit to ask my daughter to stop singing show tunes. Although that would have been entertaining as well. I'm Julie, and I'm a strategy consultant for nonprofit organizations. During the pandemic, before the pandemic, and now, work with many different types of social enterprises, faith-based, nonprofit, community, diverse ethnic groups, education, youth, right? The whole shebang. But what I was most excited about the Imagine invitation and this theme is, I think before the pandemic, organizations would say, one day we're going to build up the capacity to do that other thing, or we just need to get these ducks in a row before we try that other pivot. And when the pandemic hit, I saw so many organizations like overnight change the way they do business so that they could really be in service. And I think that energy was really exciting. And now that we're kind of on the heels of the pandemic, I'm seeing organizations do strategy very differently. They're not just saying, let's grow and let's do more of the same, just bigger. They're now really asking themselves, what are the true opportunities? And so we've been doing a lot of scenario planning. So maybe growth it's not assumed what it looks like. We're actually having honest conversations with our community members to say, what does growth look like for you? What does meaningful impact look like for you? What kind of future do you want to imagine? So I'm grateful that the strategy questions now are more open-ended, and I think the solutions better serve the community because we're now listening to the community as we design the solutions.
Well, we're so glad to have each of you with us. My name is Ashley Mayhem, and I am the MBA Social Entrepreneurship Program Coordinator. And as Darnell said, this week's theme is Imagine a Response. And so, many of you come to the table with ideas of how to respond, but a lot of questions of what to do next. And so we hope today is kind of a practical dive into what responding to these social needs and issues are. And to lead us in that, we have Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. He is the senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois. And Dr. Moss is a preacher, activist, and author. Over the last 2 decades, Dr. Moss has practiced and preached a Black theology that is unapologetically calls attention to the problems of mass incarceration, environmental justice, and economic inequality. A third-generation warrior for civil and human rights, Dr. Moss is committed to preaching a prophetic message of love and justice, which he believes, and we agree, are inseparable companions that form the foundation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, Dr. Moss is an honors graduate of Morehouse College and earned a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School and a Doctor of Ministry from Chicago Theological Seminary. Dr. Moss has a passion for preaching, which led him back to the classroom. And in early 2022, Dr. Moss was named a professor of homiletics at McAfee, where he will help up-and-coming preachers build and strengthen their own preaching ministries. The work and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the pastoral ministry of his father, Dr. Otis Moss Jr. of Cleveland, Ohio, have been primary mentors for his spiritual formation. Reverend Dr. Moss, it is a joy to have you with us. And if you're ready, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just glad that I got on. Was having such difficulty getting on Zoom. I was using that DuckDuckGo search engine, and it wipes out everything that you saved because it doesn't want any cookies on your computer. So here I was trying to reinstall stuff. I don't like cookies, but I need the cookie to get on to Zoom. But nonetheless, I am absolutely delighted to be a part of this conversation, and has already been stated by my colleagues. The theme of imagination is so stirring, because I think that it is central to our understanding of what the world can be, and how we respond to some of the challenges, and internally and externally. And I'm just so very grateful and thankful for this opportunity to be able to have a conversation at this time with everyone. My apologies that I'm not at my normal desk. I'm in North Carolina, unfortunately, in a hotel room. So hopefully the internet will work this evening. But I want to deal with this simple idea, if we were to utilize a title for a conversation, of by any greens necessary. By any greens necessary. I begin this way, out of my particular tradition, that one of the greatest cultural icons of the 20th century is arguably a person by the name of El Hajj Malik Shabazz, or known in the popular imagination as the person of Malcolm X, formerly known as Malcolm Little. Malcolm was raised in a household that revered the teachings of a Jamaican Black liberationist Christian by the name of Marcus Garvey. And he was later influenced by the teachings of a person known as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm was a prophet of Black self-esteem. He was tragically assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York in 1965. His words and deeds still echo through the halls of history and give inspiration to activists and spiritual leaders to this day. Now there may be some who raise the question and say, why would you lift up this particular individual, a Muslim icon, on this day, as we're talking about social entrepreneurship and imagination? And I would simply say that that truth is not exclusively heard in Christian vessels, a humanist frame, a secular box, Jewish Torah, or Buddhist practice. I come from a tradition that some would even call Black spirituality. This is not evangelicalism, nor is it framed by Western Christianity. But this tradition is older than this Protestant movement, and is shaped by a democratic mysticism that sees the sacred imprint of God upon all humanity. God is sovereign and has the authority to speak through a Malcolm X, a Nipsey Hussle, or a Kendrick Lamar, whether we are grinding all our lives, whether one is hustling to sacrifice, or if you know that if God's got us, we gonna be all right. Malcolm states, we declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in a society on this earth in this day, which is we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. The community, the ethic that he is putting forth, will make the determination of the methodology for transformation of the community, not the state, not the city, not the status quo. I use Malcolm because he gives us an invitation to explore transformation, especially for those who have been marginalized in these yet to be United States of America. The community shall determine, not the state, not politicians, but the communities that understand a blues experience. How do we connect to moments of gospel transformation? Self-agency and self-determination shall be the ethic undergirding the work to transform communities. And people of African descent are living in the strange space of two-ness, viewed as others, never accepted as full citizens, and seen as a problem, but yet are able to offer something unique to the democratic project within these yet to be United States of America. Now, what's fascinating is that I find an ally with Malcolm is the person from the Hebrew text, person by the name of Nehemiah. Nehemiah and Malcolm, Malcolm and Nehemiah. And so interesting, these children of Abraham find an ally. And why would I say that? It's because Nehemiah does something because he recognizes that we are going to utilize our own methodology to improve, to build rebuild the walls within and around Jerusalem. We'll repair the walls, but we're going to inspect the walls, not have someone else outside of the community to inspect, but we will determine the methodology that we'll use in order to repair. We'll use people from our community to do the repair, and we will use sustainable techniques, green techniques, someone could say, that have been passed down from generation to generation in order to repair the wall. It's fascinating that when Nehemiah suggests the repairing of the walls, those who had been benefiting from the brokenness of the walls object. But Nehemiah's powerful imagination of saying that we have a mind together to work, that we're going to do something that will be transformative. One of the greatest issues keeping us from witnessing transformation is this idea of imagination. Our imagination, our sacred imagination, moral artistry. I like to put it this way. But there are those who speak about in Genesis, God saying, let there be, that God spoke it and it became. One could make the argument that God imagined before God spoke. And when we use the words that we are made in the image of God, it is not in an anthropomorphic manner, but the fact that we have been given imagination unlike any other creature upon creation. We can see what has not yet been created, but function as if it is already done. The power of imagination. I believe it was Albert Einstein. He said, should you have genius or imagination? And Einstein said, you want to have imagination because one can be a genius, but if they have no imagination, they truly will not be able to solve problems that are put before them. It takes imagination. And I believe that imagination is the key ethic for us to utilize for the transformation of our community. Just like Malcolm had this idea of imagination, of self-determination, we will determine the methodology. Nehemiah had this imagination. And out of the tradition that I come from, known as the Black church tradition, this idea of imagination is connected to community development and connected to moral artistry and moral imagination. Can we see a different world internally in our heart and a different world for children who are yet to be born? Malcolm and Nehemiah both had the audacity to imagination. And the salvation of our nation will not come through people of power, politicians, corporate CEOs, not Silicon Valley, but through moral imagination, moral artistry, and I would say spiritual Pentecostal power, the belief that we are all interconnected and that we have breathed a ruah, a pneuma, that the breath of God inhabits us. And in the act of exhaling what God has placed in us, moments of sacred serendipity are created that are beyond our complete comprehension. Moral imagination, moral artistry, imagination of seeing that is not yet, but functioning as if it is, building a world for those who are yet to be born. And the belief in the interconnectedness of all human beings. We need people free enough in this nation who are willing to play the chords and notes of the possibility of imagination. Chords like Malcolm, the chords that Nehemiah played, the chords of Martin King, the chords of Ida B. Wells, the chords of Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, the list goes on. Those that we lift up who had incredible influence in our nation are not people of means, but are always people of imagination. Whether it's Frederick Douglass as Joy to Truth, whether you're talking Dorothy Day or Dorothy Soleil, it is always people of imagination who are creating and thinking and putting into action what everybody else says can't be done, what the board says it's not possible, what the schematic says you can't move in that direction. The utilization of moral imagination is the most powerful tool in our toolbox. We lack imagination in this nation, and the challenge for us is to be able to connect love and justice and bring about a new nation by any means we determine necessary. I might add this, that love without justice is sentimentality, and justice without love can simply become legalism or brutality. But when love and justice choose to be married, they walk down the aisle and they're betrothed to each other and they produce children, one child by the name of transformation and the other child by the name of liberation, which leads us into a new space as a people and as a nation. So this tradition that I come from, the Black church tradition of what is known as Black spirituality, is functions as a jazz moral artist. Because within this tradition, one understands how to sing the blues on Saturday and still shout on Sunday. That blues and gospel are intertwined together. That the existential experience, the pain, the challenges are before us, but yet the eschatological hope, the gospel, is also connected to us. As a matter of fact, that if you were to hear a gospel singer, you must know that the chords that they utilize are blues chords, so that you can't have gospel music unless you have blues, because they are connected to each other. You've got to have the existential, the reality of what one is dealing with the possibility of hope connected to it. And that is the key factor. What happens when we use our imagination? what can be created in the process. So I gave you this framework more on a philosophical level, a theological, but let me give you the practical of by any means necessary, which is an ethic that Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago has utilized for about the last 16 years. We're on the south side of Chicago, proudly, in an area known as Washington Heights and Roseland. And there we are on 95th Street on the south side of Chicago. And down the street from our church, we noticed that the library, the Carter G. Woodson Library, which has been in effect for quite some time, had a scaffolding outside. The scaffolding that was outside was placed by the city because the original contractor did not do a great job. They were afraid that the bricks were going to fall on somebody's head. So they put a scaffolding as patchwork instead of redoing the library. It had been out there so long that people assumed that the scaffolding was a part of the building. But the Carter G. Woodson Library has the largest collection of African-American primary resources in the Midwest. Any person who does their dissertation, whether from the University of Illinois, University of Chicago, DePaul, or Loyola, has to use this library on the south side of Chicago to read some of the letters written by W.E.B. Du Bois to Ida B. Wells, to understand the work of Gwendolyn Brooks, and to read some of the letters by Fred Hampton. You have to go to this library to get these primary resources, but yet it was falling apart. So Trinity has a community development corporation called Andaleo, Swahili for transformation. It became their task to see if they could develop this library. And the first task was to go to the Library Association and the Library Commission Board and say that we've done our research and we found that in the city of Chicago, 5 brand new libraries have been built. None on the south side, of course. But we think and believe that a new library should be built here on the south side. The commission was rather polite and said, well, we don't have any money to do that. We thank you so much for your inquiry. And so as we were exiting the meeting and I raised the question, I said, excuse me, Commissioner, I'd just like to know when the next Library Commission meeting is. I said, oh, it's in another month. I said, thank you very much. Appreciate that. The next Sunday, I stood up in church. I said, I want to let you all know what happened at our previous library meeting. They said they didn't have enough money, but there's a Library Commission meeting coming up on October 4th. I would really like it if the community would show up to that meeting. On October 4th, the Library Commission meeting opened at 7 p.m. I did not go myself. And at 8:01, the Library Commission meeting was over at 7:59, because normally no one goes to a library meeting unless you're into the Dewey Decimal System. They're not expecting people to show up. But several hundred people showed up that day with one primary question. Why don't we have a library up to par as we do on the other areas of Chicago? At 8:01, library meeting ended at 7:59. I got a call from the commissioner. They wanted to meet the next day. We met and they showed up, 9 people, and said, you know what? We found the money for the library. $10 million we found. And we said, oh, that's wonderful. That's great. You found $10 million. And they said, we want to thank you for bringing this issue to our attention. I said, well, we're not done. I said, it's not enough to have you have some funding. I want to turn this over to our Community Development Corporation. And they did a presentation about the need for contractors from the community. Not only contractors from the community and African-American contractors, but also the second piece will be those who are working on the library will have to come from the mass incarceration system, returning citizens. The third piece will be the development of the library in terms of how you do the construction must be green. And they looked at us and said, well, we don't have anything like this. We've never done this before. And then they prepared their presentation and said, well, the church used this by any means necessary framework to make sure that it would empower Black people, that it would be green in design, and would utilize and train men and women from the mass incarceration system to help dismantle this system. If a small church on the South Side can do it, why can't a city that has a budget over several $billion do it? Long story short, the city actually had to rewrite its policy to use the three-prong, and the library was renovated at an extraordinary level, to the point where it has a podcast and video studio. It specializes in Alzheimer and also dementia, meaning that any person in the community who is a caretaker, you can come to this library to receive information and training in reference to how to be a caretaker for someone with dementia. And I would invite anybody who comes to Chicago, come to the Carter G. Woodson Library. It is absolutely beautiful because the architect, who is from our community, did an extraordinary job of redesigning this library, which is truly a community gem. How did that happen? It happened because of imagination, thinking outside of the box. And the community determined the methodology that will improve and develop and transform the community, because we were not building the library just for ourselves. The library was being built for a generation that is yet to be born by any greens necessary. But we don't stop there, because that is not the only manner in which we do this. It is the function of everything we do as a community. As I mentioned, our church used this same framework. We went through a renovation for our church, and we decided to do a renovation that would be green, that would empower people in our community, that we would make sure that we had a Black woman who was an architect, and that we would utilize people from the mass incarceration system to do the renovation. And of course, we had to educate people on what green was. I have to give a nice little story as a little caveat. When I made the first presentation about renovating green, and we would put a green roof on the church, I happened to be at the barbershop, and when barbershop is the best place to find out what's going on in the community. My barber told me, he said there was an elder who was here just the other day who was fussing about the new preacher over at Trinity. He was so mad about what the preacher was trying to do. He said, "Don't you know this preacher is trying to put a putting green on top of the church?" A putting green. I said, "Oh my goodness." I did not explain. My imagination was going left and right, but I didn't explain the words for elders. So we had to go back and sit down in small groups with our elders and explain what green is, because some of them only heard of a putting green, and explain that those of you who migrated from Mississippi, you already know what green is, because you got quilts that wrap around your body. Your grandmother was green because she knew how to take pieces of cloth and weave it together. In other words, that's recycling, and wrap it around your body. And that quilt is now an heirloom that she was doing green work. The gardens that you have in your backyard. Don't you remember that when you had some cramps, that your grandmother went out back and found some leaves and things of that nature, made some tea, all of a sudden it soothed your stomach. Your grandmother was green. And even when you are eating that good gumbo, from those of you from Louisiana, you must know that gumbo is pulling bits and pieces of things that have been left over, mixing it together with a great roux. That's green. Now people serve it about $20 a bowl in certain places, but it's still this recycling, this idea of green. Once we explained it, their imagination exploded, and they were excited to be a Black and green church. And we use that particular ethic, expanding the imagination, using our moral artistry to renovate a church that would empower people coming from the mass incarceration system. From that work, our members created a farmer's market connecting with Pembroke, Illinois, which has the oldest community, generational community, of African-American farmers in the state of Illinois. And they were unable to bring their produce to some of the larger supermarkets in Chicago. But our farmers market became an incredible place of fellowship, and also supporting other institutions. Along with our our George Washington Carver garden, our community garden and Butterfly Garden, where we teach young people about botany and biology just by planting some greens, but by any greens necessary, just in expanding one's imagination. So with all of this, we took this ethic and we ended up purchasing 27 acres down the street from our church, not to build a new church, but we were raising the question, what would be how would we build a new community? The 27 acres, we had a dream, a vision, our imagination of creating a medical center, not a clinic, a true medical center, primary care, along with housing, along with an urban garden and a wellness center, that everything would use those three prongs as we talked about by any greens necessary. We finished phase one already. The medical center has been completed. Interestingly enough, the medical center was founded with 4 African-American women who were the directors of that medical center. Absolutely astounding, partnering with Advocate Healthcare, which is the largest medical provider in Illinois. And it all happened just having a conversation with someone from Advocate and raising the question about what could we do together? How could we get into some holy mischief together? And now a medical center, housing is about to go up, and we've already cleared the land for what is known as a healing garden. We received a grant to do a healing garden. What is a healing garden? A healing garden is actually the creation of green space, but since it's next to the medical center, the idea that can you prescribe nature over medicine? Instead of some of the chemicals that you would prescribe, can you offer 20 minutes in the garden, in the park every day, and will it lower your blood pressure? It's a beta test for a new way of looking at doing medicine. But we didn't stop there. We have 2 housing units specifically for seniors and a child development center in 2 locations in Chicago. For several years, for several decades, Trinity United Church of Christ has been committed to this idea of moral artistry, of imagination, and doing things by any greens necessary. Because we believe that there is a power in using our imagination. I like to say it's the jazz ethic that comes out of the African American tradition. And some may be saying, what are you talking about, jazz ethic? Yes, the jazz ethic, or the democracy of jazz, is something that America must learn how to expand its imagination to do the kind of work that is transformative in our country. And jazz music teaches us this idea, which is a spiritual music that was founded in New Orleans, that great city, I think one of the greatest cities in the United States, where you had free Haitians who made their way to New Orleans, along with indigenous people in that same space, those who were German and Spanish and Jewish living in the same space. And on Sundays, those enslaved Africans had time off. And the sounds of those who were indigenous mixed with the sounds of those who were French and German and Jewish, and the sounds of those who are Haitian mixed together to create what we know as jazz. Because jazz music does something. I believe that whether you are on the left or on the right, we must learn that you take instruments that are not supposed to play together, but they play together anyhow. The saxophone, which was made for the marching band, plays with the drum set. The drum set, or trap drum set, does not use a simple 1 and 2 rhythm, but it uses polyrhythms out of the African tradition. The piano, which comes out of the European classical tradition, then plays with the bass, which is supposed to use the bow, but they decide that they're going to use their fingers. And what is so beautiful about jazz is that everybody has the right to solo. You never hear the saxophonist saying to the pianist, you have to sound like me. You never hear the pianist saying to the drum, you've got to sound just like me, or the bass saying to the drummer, you got to sound like me. No, no, no. Each one can communicate out of their own particular cultural narrative and speak and create something new in the music. In the process, people have to swing together in their moment. I believe if we use our imagination, just like a jazz band, though we come from different parts of the world and different cultural narratives and backgrounds, we can learn how to play together, each individual having the right to solo. But if we got the right groove, in the words of John Coltrane, we can learn how to create a love supreme. That is what imagination will do. It'll teach us how to do things radically different. Imagination is dangerous. Imagination is radical. Imagination is beautiful. Imagination is sacred. By any means necessary, I believe we might be able to transform these yet to be United States of America into a nation where our children's children will look back at us and simply say, thank you. I thank you for this opportunity to be able to present and have a conversation with you on this day.
We too are grateful, Dr. Moss, for you being with us on this evening. Hearing your words, we want to allow those words to sink into the space, allow them to watch over us. And we also want to ask the question, what may be emerging for those who are listening, questions that we want to lift up for our keynote speaker. We also have some questions that we can then move into asking both the keynote speaker and the larger panel. I'm curious, as we come off the heels of last week's theme, Imagine a Church. In your address, you mentioned America needing to learn how to do jazz. And I'm curious, what would you offer to the American church and their ability to learn how to do jazz?
Ooh, that's a wonderful question. I believe that America's church is going to have to learn some different rhythms. They're going to have to learn how to clap on 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. Just like James Brown taught, they said, look here, we're going to do things on 1 and 3. And that was very intentional. And the problem with tradition, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but sometimes you can deify tradition or deify methodology. I love to say it this way. The church needs to know that the message of Jesus stays the same, but the methodology changes. Jesus never heals people the same way, and I'm glad he doesn't. I'm glad that for some people, he's got to, spit on the ground and slap some mud on your eyes. Some people just says, go home, it's all right, just go home. Some people it just says, stretch out your hand and your hand will be healed. I like to put it this way. I'm gonna do a survey right now for everybody who's on here. How many people here know anything about music on a 78? Anybody here know anything about music on a 45 or 33? Music better on listening to music on something called an LP. Those are gigantic discs for those who do not know what that is. Or an 8-track tape or a cassette tape or a CD, and now streaming. You can take the song Amazing Grace, play it on a 78, a 45, a 33, an LP, an 8-track, a cassette, a CD, or stream. It's the same song, it's a different method of delivery. But the problem is we have 8-track churches in a streaming world, and we wonder why we cannot reach a new generation because we've deified the method instead of elevating the message.
That's good. I love the anecdote that you shared in the confusion around language, the green roof. And so I'm curious what role, you said that you had to spend some time explaining that use of terminology. What role, can you speak more to that? When people have this imagination, there's often that disconnect, what you're saying. We have a track and in a streaming world. And so like, how do we explain?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that we instituted a listening session where I went to elders' homes in our church. Started with the elders first. Always got to start with the elders first when it comes to certain things like this in the church, and shared the vision, but then did the translation. And certain elders became translators for me. So that idea of a quilt, that's not mine. That's one of the elders. Oh yeah, that's my grandmother used to use quilts. That's recycling, baby. I mean, they started doing the translation. Once they did the translation, they became the evangelist. Once they became the evangelist, all of a sudden, all of the, you always got people in the church that, they're obstinate. They just, I'm not going to do nothing, da, 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 da. They complain the whole time. All of a sudden, those individuals were isolated. They're like, you mean you're not going to support what 89-year-old Deacon Thelma Hogue just presented on? This isn't about the pastor. This is the legacy she's leaving. She said she's green. Matter of fact, she just said she's black and green. Then she said, I'm red, black, and green. It was really fascinating to see the elders take on this as a legacy project, because they wanted to see their children's children and the institution that they have committed to thrive. So they became the evangelists. They're the ones who shared the vision and took hold of it in a very special way.
Thank you. I want to invite our presenters to join us on camera as we have a more fuller conversation around the topic, Imagine a Response. So a way of connecting what was lifted up in the keynote is to be able to talk about this idea of methodologies and using the idea of CDs and 8 tracks and 45s and streaming. And I want to ask, what is your opinion on the way to respond to this generation's most pressing issue, methodology? So what is the methodology or a methodology that one will respond to the most pressing issues of this generation? I'll invite Tyler first. I think his presentation definitely is relevant for this moment.
Sure. So looking at this from a technology perspective, I think we know we're at our best when we're connected. This idea of strength in numbers to share knowledge and spur action. But for me, it's a kind of response to our generation's most pressing issues. It's what's that next step? During the pandemic, we figured out how to have Zoom conversations like this and do the webinars, and that's great. But how can we elevate that to connect ourselves even more, share knowledge, and inspire others to take action around some of our most serious issues threatening society? One example I like to bring up is a client of mine, Council for Health and Human Service Ministries, sought to ask themselves this question, and they didn't want to do another presentation per se, though there's certainly value in those for sure. But they wanted to try to contextualize key information around the idea of racism as a public health threat. So they sought to buy a learning management system, which is just an easy online tool to be able to host courses. And instead of investing a lot of time and effort into creating their own content, they contextualized, took the great works of others that were freely available online, podcasts, YouTube videos, that sort of thing, and sought to put it in one space where people could enroll in a self-paced kind of way and take these online courses to learn more about this public health threat and some of the actionable things they could do to address it in their own lives. And what they found was membership in the organization went up. Over 1,000 people took the course. So we know that technology can bring us together. And in my mind, that's one of the most powerful ways that we can help combat some of these threats, to our society.
I'll hop in. So I think some of our generation's most pressing issues feel so big and so heavy. And so during the pandemic, we either put our heads in the sand or we had some pioneers that were very bold and took some leaps of faith. I believe that as leaders, we have a responsibility to bring people along. And that even though I appreciated the comment that, tradition is good, but can't hold us back, we look to seek for best practices. We look towards the experts. But what I'm realizing now in my 40th year on this earth is we cannot wait for people to become experts. We have to bring the next generation along and include them in what was previously considered exclusive tables, exclusive spaces, and really open up those doors. Let's create inclusive table. I don't want a seat at the table anymore. I want to build the table. I think that is the shift that we need today in our approach of working with community. The community, they are the table. And so they are the experts. And that is the shift that I am seeing. And when we can realize that shift, not only are we bringing others along as we plan, as we design, as we build, we are teaching the next generation how to do that. And so I think as leaders, we've always heard, we don't have anyone to take our place. Like, how am I supposed to retire, right? Our baby boomers, I can't retire. I can't find anyone to be my successor. I think that is the flaw of the previous generation of caring, but not being intentional enough of bringing the younger generation alongside so that we're training them as we're building.
So Rick shares in the Q&A that they're interested in the transformative power of literacy/writing. We'll open this up to all of you. Could you expand on the power of language and perhaps how you've seen that in your context?
So I can, hi everyone. I can speak a little bit to that maybe. So I think what we're seeing, and I just, Dr. Moss, I really, really loved your keynote. And my answer to the question, what does this generation need? I was just going to say, just listen to the keynote. And how I feel like what you articulated there about a church and, your leadership in the church in its local community with the library and the medical center and the elderly care and the stuff with the children, and that it, in some ways, what you described, that there wasn't language or categories for that kind of endeavor a number of years ago. Now, of course, it was happening in different ways in different communities, I think, but there's ways in which language and understandings have been able to leap, and I think it's the act of the imagination, right, across some boundaries. There were boundaries between healthcare and other things. So the idea of, this prescribing you talked about, which I'm a big fan of like lowering blood pressure by going to the garden and not going on necessarily that medicine. We're in this moment, I think, which is full of both possibility, but also maybe in some instances peril, when blurriness is everywhere, right? And so the creativity is precisely that ability of saying, well, what is the role of the church in the community? What is the place of business and enterprise within our faith communities? What is the kind of connection between local politics and our healthcare? And so I think so what we find, I think, is both we don't necessarily have all the language we need to describe this new landscape, but the more we can do that, which is even this phrase, social enterprise, which is not too long ago, that would have not made sense to a lot of people, right? Because it's like those are two separate things, business, enterprise that makes profit, social stuff that distributes profit, but they don't do the same thing. I feel like the joining of words together, the creation of new ways of thinking and using language to describe and map this kind of emerging reality is crucial. And I think Dr. Moss's talk, by any greens necessary, I've written that down, right, is a brilliant sentence that illuminates exactly that. Like, what is green? What is greens? And it's got all these layers, all these levels. And it is the way that language can, I think, unpack our imagination and help us see opportunity in the blurring of boundaries around us, where we can, I think, my hope is that create meaningful community-led futures, where the agency and abundance and authority lies within the communities, and that communities can own, discover, and make, as opposed to be told what to do, be pushed down. And so I think that language is so crucial in leading and mapping that sort of emerging reality.
Thank you, Mark. I'm thinking about Alexis's presentation this week, and I'm imagining this question in light of the theme Imagine a Response. How might the church congregational life move forward to take action, but without the mindset of what's in it for me? So how do we move forward taking action and responding, but not with the hidden agenda of what's in it for us?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would say the organizer in me would say that self-interest isn't necessarily a bad thing. Asking yourself what's in it for me isn't automatically negative, but I think that, for us, we need to ask that question in regard to our faith, right? So if I'm thinking what's in it for me in regard to my faith, what I'm really asking is like, how is something helping me to be more faithful? What is a faithful response here? What's in this for me as a faithful Christian, or however I identify? And with that lens, I would say that sort of hand in hand with imagination being a key ethic for addressing the problems that we face, another is proximity. I think that a lot of churches and a lot of folks struggle with understanding, how to address civil justice issues now is because they're not proximate to them. A lot of our churches are still very homogenous. In my own experience, the church that I pastored a few years ago was in a very diverse part of the country. Fairfax County, Virginia is one of the most diverse counties in the country. This neighborhood was a third Korean, and the church that I served was pretty much all white, and had no just connection to the community around it. I think that, many of the churches that we serve, this congregation, had strong progressive ideals and maybe wanted to be different, but just didn't know sort of how to make the first step. And I would say that, proximity is really the answer. A lot of folks, wanted to move Virginia on the death penalty, but didn't have any connection with anyone in prison at all, or even knew where the prison was or anything like that. And it's not necessarily a commentary on these people's character or anything. It's just the reality. A lot of these systems are built to keep barriers and distance between us. A lot of the work I was doing around DC had to do with immigrants and folks seeking refuge in our country. And all the detention centers are really out of sight, out of mind. They're in very rural areas. They're hard to get to on purpose. So if you want to know more about what these experiences are like for folks, you have to make a lot of sacrifices to get that understanding. And I think that, one of the things that we would just really need to do is help sustain each other for this long haul work, right? A lot of us are going to have to make sacrifices if we do want to be more faithful in this way. And that sort of goes hand in hand with imagination. When we talk about imagining a different future, we're really practicing the art of wondering about something and being curious. And so I think that, one of the things that we can, churches and just faith leaders, leaders in general need to do is be more just direct about that, sort of call it out a little bit. And, just encourage folks to sort of make relationships and sustain them for the long haul.
Thanks, Alexis. Mark, I'm going to circle back to you real quick. Jumping off of what Alexis was just talking about with these sacrifices is the word she used. In your workshop, you used the word constraints. And one of the things that I was thinking about was oftentimes congregations, they'll become aware of a need, but they'll think, oh, we can't do X, Y, Z. We can't do this specific, we can't meet this specific need. We're just not going to do anything now. And they don't press a little further into this imagination. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little more about social capital or in-kind donations, and whether that's something that's underutilized by faith communities.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's quite common, isn't it? I think psychologically, or I don't know, maybe socially, to focus on what we don't have or what we can't do or barriers that are in our way, and then see those things as evidence or as persuading us that we shouldn't even try something. So it's a kind of, that could be it's too hard, we don't have that resource, we don't have that sort of stuff. And on the flip side, perhaps we imagine that someone somewhere, and they're obviously incredibly wealthy people, there's very resourced people in the world, that we're thinking, oh, they could do anything. They have no barriers, no resources. So they're the ones that, maybe could do something, so the powerful, the wealthy, whatever. I want to flip that round, because I think with imagination, it's actually the other way around. I think like constraints, like not being able to do some things, actually gives you the conditions for creativity. Like it actually creates an environment where imagination can flourish. And I want to suggest, maybe controversially, that the lack of constraints is a terrible place for imagination. Like to have everything you need to then like actually do something creative in the world, often there's not the constraints there, there's not the process. So you because you could do anything, you can't do anything. So not being able to do everything actually gives you the green light to do something. And to have constraints to say, well, we can't do that, but hey, we've got this bit of, this is our sandpit, this is our play area, we can do something there. And to follow that, the reason why I think we often see constraints as barriers or as a kind of no sign is because we're so used to thinking about money, right? We're so used to thinking about financial assets as the thing that unlocks or imagination or possibility. And, there's been lots of work done in the last few years around trying to understand capital in broader senses. It's not just financial capital, but there's physical capital, there's spiritual capital, there's social capital, there's human capital. And all of these are ways in which they're assets we have that that can be used very creatively to address problems in our communities and to create opportunities in our neighborhoods. And I think one of the things that, if you're a part of a Christian faith community or a church or something, that there's going to be social capital there. Like, who you know can be an enormous benefit to responding to something. And we, when we're working with churches, we try to help them think about who people know that they know, right? So like, where are you 2 steps removed from somebody? I think we could probably learn a lot about this from Alexis around community organizing and their strategies around social capital and network building. And I think that is an enormous sort of something that churches can use, or social entrepreneurs can use. But I would just encourage you, when you've got constraints, see that as an opportunity for imagination, because the conditions are right. Right.
I may add to that. I think the best music is created under constraints. So you get good music, 2 turntables and a microphone creates hip hop under constraints. Jazz music, gospel, anything that you love that's good, it was under constraint. It wasn't unlimited resources.
Yeah, and why is everybody's first albums their best ones? Right? Because where did they write the music? They wrote it in their bedroom. They wrote it like when they were on their bus on the way home from like working 2 jobs. The third albums, then if they've made it by then, not so good.
I have a question for Julie. You shared in your presentation about cultivating ambassadors and community partners. I'm curious, what practices have you seen to be most effective?
Thank you for asking that. I get a lot of questions as a consultant on how do you build the leadership pipeline, because people who are in leadership are tired. If you have a group of 10 people, usually 3 to 5 are maybe pulling most of the weight. And so people are wondering, how can I pass that baton? And so what I've learned is people don't want the title right away. There's a lot of, it goes back to that, the burden is so heavy. And so if the first thing we ask out of the gate is lift this by yourself, their immediate response is going to be no. And so what I've learned is again, that hand holding, that breaking it into digestible pieces where you are fostering their knowledge and their comfort around practicing a new skill. And so if it is pitching a health clinic or a health fair leadership opportunity at your church, and you need somebody to step up and lead that event, I've partnered with multiple churches and health clinics to bring health fairs to the community. And we're always looking for event leaders, and it's crickets. But when I break down the event and say, I need someone to send out these emails, I need someone to ask for the food vendors, I need someone to do the tickets or get the donations. When those are specific asks, people feel they can see that they can be helpful, and it's less daunting. And so I think that is kind of our job, is to make it less scary. And it's amazing. It's just a little support. And once they get a taste of it, they want to do more, right? It feels like they're part of a bigger effort. They see the results of our collective labors. And by year 2, right, or even just a few months in, folks are asking, what else can I do, right? And so I also have run really, really large collaborations with over 100 partners, with faith communities, school districts, city government, health clinics. And very quickly I learned I cannot manage 100 partners on my own. I need to distribute the responsibility. And through that was able to help train future leaders because I literally moved to a different state. So I could no longer lead that effort. But those were some early lessons. Don't get discouraged if people don't seem on board. Sometimes they just need a little bit of time, and for you to take just an extra moment to break it down for them and find them that window, right? That crack that door open just a little bit and guide them through. So don't get discouraged yourself. I see a lot of leaders get discouraged because their big idea maybe isn't as accepted as warmly initially, or people accept it, but then don't want to contribute. Like, people need time. They need to be cultivated a little bit and shepherded along.
That's great. Tyler, this next question is for you. As we said, this week, there's a lot of practical knowledge that you all have provided, which is wonderful. And Tyler, for many people, they have this idea of how they're going to respond. There's an idea for a social enterprise. They start taking steps, and the world that we live in, this is a streaming world, so we're going to lean into the technology. What are some of the tech faux pas that leaders, nonprofits, even congregations fall into that you really wish you could just nip in the bud?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I have 10 years of them, but I'll try to boil it down to just a few to get started. I think there's naturally the easy things where my mind instantly goes, right? So 21st century security is of the utmost importance. You're not only going to be responsible for your own data, but the data that's going to pass through your care at different points. So operating initially from a security mindset is really important. And I don't mean to take this to an unapproachable extreme. I once had a client who made vegan croissants, and her prior tech consultant had her so scared of the world that she was backing things up to 3 different hard drives and had encryption. It's like, oh goodness, we're selling croissants, like put it in iCloud or Dropbox and be done, please. But the idea from a nonprofit, or especially a social enterprise, getting off the ground and thinking just a little bit with this mindset in an approachable way is really important from the start. And what I mean by that is making sure you're not repeating passwords across services, investing in a password management tool like LastPass, which encourages you to create strong passwords for each account, not disregarding Facebook when it says you have to turn on 2-factor authentication, which means you get a text message in addition to your password. You have to put a code in. So it adds an extra level of security there. So operating with that kind of mindset from the start is something I wish I could instill at the beginning. Another one would be this whole notion of beginning with the end in mind. So today it might just be you out there trying to change the world, right? But tomorrow, hopefully it's not. And I see a lot of organizations that begin and they're operating from like a personal email address, an AOL, a Yahoo, or a Gmail. The problem is it's really hard to foster that sense of legitimacy, get donors, get traction when you're not working from a branded email address. So something I tried to hit home in the presentation is how easy it can be to sign up for a $6 a month Google Workspace account that gives you that branded, Tyler at mynonprofit.org or mysocialenterprise.com, for instance. Then there's the harder piece of the whole equation. And that's this notion that technology alone can fix it. And that's a harder thing for me to get organizations to realize. At some point, some salesperson is going to walk into the room and try to sell you, a $50 solution to a 50-cent problem. And that's really frustrating for me to walk into. I've seen many nonprofits who are promised there's a golden tool that's going to solve all their issues. So they invest tens of thousands of dollars into it, only to find out that it wasn't the right solution. So I really encourage organizations who might have a technology issue or a gap where they think technology might be able to assist, to really sit down and do the hard work of figuring out what is the problem you're actually trying to solve, and are there solutions already in their portfolio of tools that are a lot cheaper that can actually solve it.
Thank you, Tyler. So in concert with what was shared with the keynote, lifting up the musical elements in Dr. Moss's keynote address, I want to kind of think about this, take a moment for us to think about the blues of this work. So whenever we're responding, Nina Simone has a song called Backlash Blues. So whenever we respond, we take action. There's often internal and of course external responses that will give us the blues. So if we could just make space as practitioners who are responding, who are doing the work, to even lift up the moments that we've had the blues, how we've tried to do something and how we may have had the internal backlash, external backlash. So therefore our listeners are able to understand, yes, we're responding, but normalizing that this is also a part of the process of responding. I would invite Dr. Moss first to share. I'm sure you have some good notes to share with us.
Oh, I've got plenty of blues to be able to share without a doubt. If you choose the work of imagination, moral artistry, of transformation, failure is always wrapped up into your work. But how you examine your failure is key. It becomes critical. And that's why I'm glad you brought up the blues, because that's one of the beautiful things about Ma Rainey says it this way. She says, the blues helps me get up in the morning. It says that there's something in this world and it speaks to me, paraphrase her, but she's facing something without falling into despair. It's all about how you will examine. Steph Curry, he says it, I think even better when he says, you just don't know how many shots I miss. You just don't know how many shots I miss. I mean, he just said, you have no idea. Please don't think I've been shooting out here at half court all my life. I started under the basket and moved back from there. And I think that is the way in which we have to look at the work. Learn the practice of being under the basket and being a foot away from the basket, and then being all right by taking a step back and just being 2 feet away, and not get frustrated, but just be involved in the practice and the beauty of the practice and all aspects of it, and finding joy even when you miss. And I think that's really important, that there is some joy even in the messed up chords. I think Thelonious Monk said it this way. He says, I don't make music with the notes. It's the space in between that actually makes the song. And the mistakes I make actually create the composition.
Thank you for that. On a personal note, I had something last week. There was something that happened in a project I'm doing where it's a long story, but basically there was a sort of 24-hour window when everything could have just gone horribly wrong. And it ended up not being, but I remember sitting there at one point, totally awake in the middle of the night, thinking, why do I do this to myself? Why do I do these things that have this risk? And then let's say it actually just doesn't work. And not only does it not work, but it actually causes problems. Like it's like, oh, and I sat there thinking, like 2 a.m, like, why do I do this? Like, what is wrong with me? And why don't I just, do not do this? Like, if you're a social entrepreneur, you're stepping out in risk. And there is that was a literal dark night of the soul. And you will have those. And I think, and you got to, I think in some way, you got to make friends a little bit with those moments and not rush away from them. Not, leave it too quickly, but believe that you're part of a bigger story, right? And, I think it kind of, as a Christian, I feel like ultimately help comes from outside, right? It's not, and so but it was, those moments, oh, they're tough. They're tough.
So my topic was around communicating your mission. And I think the dark moments are when you wonder if you're the only one who believes in this. Why is this so difficult? Or you work with the people that are closest to you and a miscommunication happens, right? And things are just, they're feeling really tough and you question yourself. In a lot of the work, when I work with community and teams, sometimes it just simply comes down to people dynamics and all of our life experiences culminating in that particular moment. And so we all come from somewhere, and those experiences impact the way we react in that moment. And there are two types of people in the world. Some people are very much people, feeling, empathetic, charismatic. And then there are other folks who are more data, competency driven, and very systems oriented, just kind of get it done, right? And so when those two types of people come together, if they value each other and their disparate skills, like magic can happen. But if they haven't taken yet the time to fully understand each other's just beauty, they can clash. And so in a lot of the work that I do, when teams are like, we all have the same values, we all have the same goals, but yet we're kind of stuck, we're going in circles. What's happening here? And I find that when they can see they each come from a different work culture or cultural background, they start to see it's not personal. This is just our preference in how we communicate. And when there's that awareness, they can adjust how they talk with each other and it feels less personal and they can get back to business. So I share that to help everyone here think about, where do you lean? People tend to lean one way or the other naturally. You're either you gravitate towards charisma or you gravitate towards competence. You're more of a people person or you're more of like a doer, right? And sometimes people are both, because in society you need both to be successful. But just think about which one fills your cup, which one brings you more joy, because that is your natural state. And if you're working in a culture or in a space or with somebody who is different from your joyful culture, that's where you might feel the rub. And it's not bad. It's just hopefully helping you have an awareness, and then you can readjust your approach.
One thing I'd like
I want to assume, but go ahead, Tyler. Sorry.
Yeah. So often when either mistakes are made or you had such a well conceived notion for how something was going to turn out, and it went off the rails at some point. What I see a lot of organizations miss, and the kind of hidden opportunity here, is they're too quick to look past that and get to the other side and move on to the next thing without taking the necessary time to actually examine what the opportunity there was, where it actually went off the rails, what maybe contributed to that, and then share that knowledge, right? Like the whole benefit of having experience is being able to share it. And as an organization, I think it's so important to look internally in those moments and not look at them as some terrible, awful thing, but rather an opportunity for growth, and do a deep dive on the lessons learned, and then make that more of a part of the fabric of the culture of the organization moving forward.
I was just going to invite Alexis if she wanted to share. I'm also a former organizer, so I know the backlash that happens in that particular space of doing that work. So,
yeah, I was going to unmute earlier, but I was waiting for the train to pass by. So, yeah, I mean, I think just in sort of echoing some of the things that have been said, I'm a sports fan too, so those sort of metaphors mean a lot to me. And my favorite tennis player, Rafael Nadal, often says about failure that, like, when he loses a match, that it is what it is. That doesn't mean he failed. He feels like a failure when he no longer believes he can win. And that's what he practices, or that's what's more important than practicing sort of like the craft. And I mean, I adore him, but what that really means to me, or reminds me of, is that, having hope is really a discipline. There are so this work is difficult. I mean, the work of justice in our world as it is formed and organized right now, it's easy to get discouraged, but we have to practice as part of our sort of spiritual lives the discipline of hope and sort of choosing to believe that there are other possibilities in the world than what we see, choosing to believe in our own power and our own ability to come together and bring the kingdom of God or bring justice, however you want to define that, to change our reality. And so that's what I would really say to everyone here and everyone in attendance, to just be mindful of that when you're feeling sort of down or frustrated or feeling like quitting. Maybe surround yourself with folks and with art and music, whatever it is, to just reinvigorate your spirit and make you feel hopeful.
That's good. I'm actually going to open this up to everyone here. So, we've witnessed come to the surface many disparities in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are many people who are becoming more familiar with this term of social enterprise or social entrepreneurship. What would each of your encouragement be to those who have started to notice these systemic disparities or this brokenness? What would be, a great first step to respond in a faithful way?
I would say, just as like a person who has pastored congregations and has been very close to the church for a long time, I would say for people who are feeling, like social entrepreneurs and sort of wanting to go in a different direction, to just keep asking yourself who you are and who's going with you. Sometimes that doesn't mean the local church, just quite honestly. But I would say that, like, if you have a vision and you really believe that you can respond to it faithfully, find your people and give yourself some time to do that. Those might be people it might be meaning making new relationships, and finding other folks who share your vision, and sort of going from there.
I would add that I think finding your tribe becomes critical. Raising questions becomes essential, and being unafraid not to raise the questions externally, but how are you a participant in the work that is creating the condition? Are you an ally, an accomplice, a co-conspirator? Where are you in that spectrum, or a spectator? And I think that those are internal questions that we have to. I don't think anybody is one or the other. I think that we flow throughout that spectrum at some point. That sometimes we're spectators, sometimes we're allies, sometimes we're co-conspirators, and sometimes we're just convicted. And so we just have to find out where we're flowing on that scale and keep raising the question.
I would say, as a way of wrapping up our evening, we talk about imagining a response, and we recognize that we are story people, that we gather around stories. Stories are what anchor us. And we've heard stories lifted up, but I want us maybe to bring into this virtual space some stories of people you've worked with, people that may not, this group may not have been privileged to know, but we lift up their story of imagining a response. So that church, that organization, that entrepreneur who is doing this work in the world, just so people can hear more stories and be inspired and encouraged that they're not alone in their own corner in the world as they imagine their response. I would probably invite, go ahead, Julie.
I'll just share briefly that I find churches and different faith communities to be some of the most open-minded, creative partners that I work with. Just so passionate about the work at hand that we've talked a lot about that ability to imagine, ability to see that a different outcome must be there. And I think that unwavering conviction is exactly the type of leadership that we need. And I've seen that leadership is what transforms the narrative from we've tried that before, it doesn't work, or we're just being oppressed, to trying to become the leaders. And so I think so many of the faith community leaders, but also the nonprofit and education and business leaders who have all kind of put their agendas aside for this broader community mission, whether it's education or health or just keeping families united. So I encourage us all to look at those cross-sector opportunities and getting outside our immediate circles to see what's possible. Because the biggest change I'm seeing in our sector is that breaking down of the silos, breaking down of the barriers, and this understanding that all of these things are connected. Health is connected to wealth, is connected to incarceration, is connected to, I have clients now who are talking about end of life. How do I make the most of my last few years or weeks or days? And it is a holistic conversation. You can't have that without talking about family, right? So I am very excited in this move over the last 5 to 10 years about this holistic approach. And in our nonprofit sector, that may seem new and incredible, but I know in the faith communities, that's always been how we operate, that you can't separate personal from family, from professional. It's all of our community, and that we are each responsible for taking care of it together. So thank you for the opportunity to share and to partner with you all.
If I can just echo on what Julie said there, in my day job, I do online education for a Fortune 500 company, and then I do this consulting with Health and Human Service Ministries on the side. And at the height of the pandemic, or I should say when the pandemic was really ramping up, it was an interesting kind of anecdotal case study to see how faith-based organizations pivoted versus a big freight, like a big Fortune 500 company. You can't turn the Queen Mary kind of on a dime, right? And one thing it made me appreciate is that faith-based organizations and social enterprises, which are so much better equipped from a holistic standpoint to handle the kind of challenges that the pandemic posed, as well as the challenges that society is going to face in the future, right? It's not only addressing somebody's immediately, physical needs, but also their emotional and spiritual and mental needs as well. And I think that allowed these organizations to be more creative. I saw the pivot to online happen a lot quicker. I saw the book groups and the social media engines really ramping up so much faster. They promoted learning, they had shared meaning. So if I could just offer any inspiration from what I've seen from my very non-scientific view at two totally separate and somewhat disjointed areas, you really can't replace the power of a faith-based social organization when it comes to pivoting and making good work happen.
I think just one small story that comes to mind, which I think is is hopeful in its sort of simplicity. And just to sort of preface it, one of the ways I'm fascinated about social enterprise and social entrepreneurship is at its best, I see it as experiments of mutuality. And particularly for Christians, like expressions of a kind of theology and economics of mutuality, where, to be human is to both give and receive. And that we can create structures and projects and organizations where there's giving and receiving and mutuality embedded within them. So a project I was involved in England before I moved to America was a cafe started in a church on a high street, and I was involved in that process, and lots of interesting stories about that. But they got to be friends with the local family practice doctors in the community and a local nonprofit arts group. And the three of them got together and realized that and very similar to Dr. Moss's story, that there were profound health needs in the community that weren't being sufficiently addressed by the current practice of healthcare. And so the cafe created a space in its cafe and for a community of the lonely. And there it was the doctor, when they'd come across somebody who and the doctor was diagnosing that their physical and mental health challenges were primarily related to their isolation, would prescribe them lunch at the cafe with a certain group of people. So they'd go along, and this has been going on for over a year now, where there's been just a community of people who were totally isolated from connecting with each other, and have over time, through facilitated conversation, through the arts, through eating together, formed a community. And it's been profoundly transformative for people's lives. So much so that they've now have two other little communities in the cafe that have been formed. One is for teenagers struggling with their mental health, and then one is for young mothers that are suffering from postpartum depression. But it's the family, the doctors prescribing relationships and the conditions of like conviviality in a community as a solution has been transformative for the neighborhood. And so I think that's it's very simple, very low key, but it's about how expressions of mutuality and relationship can create imaginative responses to profound needs.
And I'll say for me, in my day job, I work for an organization that does interfaith cooperation. And I had the honor earlier this year on the southwest side of Chicago of going to the grand opening of a store called Go Green on Racine Fresh Market in Englewood, Chicago. And I felt really privileged to attend that market opening, because it had been about like 15 years worth of community organizing to see that market become a reality. A grocery would be considered a food desert. Thousands of folks who don't have access to fresh food. And when I was a grad student at University of Chicago, like over a decade ago, I remember doing some of the initial organizing work to build just the relationships in the community to make that happen. And it's just truly remarkable to see the space, which was the joint vision of so many years of building trust between Arab communities, Black communities, Muslim groups, Christian groups, that entire neighborhood. A lot of problem solving, a lot of discerning how to create a store that not only would provide food, but also support the community. And just, celebrating all that went into that really deeply faithful work, like specific choices that were made, like the construction of the building itself was designed to have a lot of natural light, which if you're familiar with just storefronts and corner stores, usually don't have any windows. And even if there is a window, they have like bars and bulletproof glass there. So none of that, having very open space, having a lot of natural light in. Having the actual construction of the store. And so offering people who live there, you know, a chance to make a living wage and to be a part of building the future of this neighborhood and building what they want to see. And so I think that, you know, as I'm going through the store and I'm seeing all the cool things and just sort of celebrating the fanfare of it, to me, it's just a reminder of like, this is the best of what faith-based organizing can do, right? Seeing these sorts of transformations, staying with an initiative for 15 years, you know, to see what it can do for the people there. And that when I was talking to some of the workers who had gotten jobs there and some of the people who were shopping, it just really spoke to me about how people were dreaming different now. Like they had a different ability to think about possibility in general, just to think about what it means to have faith in your neighbor, what it means to have faith in your community and believe in the possibilities for your future. And so I sort of just like lift that up as an example of like a positive like success story, but also as a reminder that, you know, this is really long haul work. This is really lifelong work, but it is sort of the best of all of our traditions.
I would add two quick stories, and just to add on also what Reverend Alexis mentioned. There's an organization, Aman, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, that has built in Chicago the only monument to Martin Luther King in Marquette Park. And what was so beautiful about this monument, though it was a group of primarily Muslim Americans who put it together along with artists from around the city, was the statement at the dedication that blew me away. And Rami Nashibi, who is the executive director, he said, "I'm a Palestinian Muslim. You know, I'm Chicago bred, but my family's from Bethlehem." And he said, "The reason we lift up this monument, the reason we built this monument, is that Muslim mobility is directly connected to Black resistance." And it was such a beautiful statement of connecting the fact that we have mobility in America because of another group. And I thought it was just I shared with him. I said, "Man, you killed it when you gave your presentation." But the second thing is that blesses me is 90-plus-year-old people on Zoom talking about their gardens, using the technology and saying, "Baby, look what I grew out back." I mean, if that doesn't inspire you, I mean, many times we use these jokes about seniors and technology, but a child of the Great Depression is using technology from Silicon Valley to bring us back to creation. That to me is just inspiring in and of itself.
Amen. Inspiring indeed. We are blessed by this panel, by your stories, by your wisdom, and we are just fueled up to continue to imagine a response in our own individual context. And for those of us who may feel a little bit weary in our work, perhaps this is a recharge to keep going forward, knowing that you are not alone. So we want to thank the panel for being with us this evening and spending a few hours with us this evening sharing. And we now will turn things over to my colleague Ashley, who will give some final housekeeping, and then we will bid you farewell for the evening.
Yes, we hope you feel refreshed, energized. For those of you who have an idea of a social enterprise, or maybe you're in those very early stages of development in launching a social enterprise, and you would like more of this practical, hands-on kind of guidance through just the world of health and social service nonprofit, we want to invite and remind you that we are currently accepting applications for our 2023 SENT cohort that will close on October 1st. So we have just over a week for you to submit your application. We'll get that put in the chat here in just a second. But we encourage you to apply and to look at our website for some more explanation on what that provides. It's a peer support process. This is a 1-year journey, and you'll get coaching and education, peer support, some resourcing, and we really want to walk alongside you to explore how you might respond faithfully. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to our panelists, as Darnell said, and to send us out, we invite Reverend Dr. Moss to send us out.
Let's have a word of prayer at this moment. Gracious and most merciful God, we give you thanks for this moment and this conversation. May we have the courage to imagine. May you allow us to get into holy mischief. May we resist with our creativity, recognize the power of poetry, the beauty of connection and relationships. And may we be able to witness all of the creativity happening around us, from the smallest action to the largest organization. We are all interconnected, and may we learn to make new music together to create something that is not but act as if it is. We give you thanks this night. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you all.